All right, welcome, Daniel.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
And we always start our conversations with a personal check-in. So I welcome you to share with us where you're joining us from today and how you're doing at the levels of body, heart, and mind.
I'm in La Subia, Granada province in Andalusia in southern Spain, where I live now with my wife and two young girls, and I'm doing pretty good. We just moved here 7 weeks ago, and so I am still adjusting on the level of body and culture and rhythm and work and every other thing, but I'm good. And yeah, I mean, I could say a lot about my own process, but I'm enjoying the change. And so far, it is as good as I had hoped in terms of uprooting our life and moving across the ocean. So I'm glad to be here and doing well. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm on your newsletter mailing list. And when I got the news that you moved, some parts of me were envious. So I think a lot of people listening in the US, it's just with everything that is happening here, that has been happening here, that could happen here. I know a lot of us are considering moving abroad, and it's inspiring that you not only moved yourself, but a family of four. And
Mm.
um, was there like a particular defining moment, or like what led you to say, let's do this?
There's a lot I could say, but in general factors are wanting to raise our daughters in a multicultural way that is not reflective of American exceptionalism and imperialism, and wanting them to be multilingual, and wanting personally to be closer to Europe and in a more culturally diverse place for parenting, and just personally. And I was at our older daughter's completion for her Montessori. She was, she's 4, and found myself in June, I think it was, standing in the back row, wondering how I would navigate an active shooter situation. And I don't want our children to be killed by machine gun fire at their schools. And so that's another reason I've left the United States and hope to not return. And I like values like more or less free education and healthcare. And there's a quality of unresolved trauma, and I guess I would say like cynicism and meanness, that I just feel real sad about, having spent the first 45 years of my life, aside from travel, in the US. And I'm just beginning to detox. I was with a friend today, and it was comfortable temperature out, and he left. We went to a pottery shop or something, and he left his 8-month-old in the car with the windows down because it's comfortable, because she was napping. She was like actually out of his sight for a moment. And I was like, in my nervous system, I was like, whoa, is that okay? Oh my God, you're leaving your kid in your car. This is dangerous. The world is dangerous. And he was just like, he's French, Moroccan. And he was just like, it's okay, man. She's right there. It's okay. And so uh, yeah, I'm downshifting here. There's lots of other layers, but as a father, I want our children to grow up in a better environment than the United States is currently able to offer. And that's privileged of me. And I feel slightly bad about it, but not enough to stop me from taking the opportunity to move.
Yeah, I hear that. I remember when I visited Iceland some years ago, I saw, like, going into the grocery store, people would just leave their babies in the carriages outside of stores as they went in,
Uh-huh.
because they felt that fresh air is better for them than being in the store, and it's
Uh-huh.
totally safe to do that. And it was just so shocking because you could never do that here in the US.
Oh yeah, I looked up like how many mass shootings are there in Spain, and it was like none. We don't like. They're just like we don't do it like that here. We do. It's not like a few every once in a while. It's like no, there aren't as many cops here. It's not as many guns. It's not the idealized things. Everywhere has their complexity, but you know. So those are a few things. I did not to be so heavy about it, but the U.S. is a mess, and I feel so sad for how it is there, and all that still lives in me and will for all of my life. But I need a break,
Yeah,
so
I hear
I'm
that.
experimenting with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of what I wanted to talk about today with you is this whole process and concept of ancestral healing. And that's how I was first introduced to your work several years ago. A colleague here in Boulder recommended it, and I had a session with you and started working with one of my lineages and with one of my lines, and got your book, and then didn't continue on. And then the pandemic came, and suddenly I was just sheltering in place by myself, not much to do. And you were offering your online course for ancestral lineage healing. And I was a part of it, which I was really grateful for because I had a lot more time and space to do the work, and also more motivation because of all that you shared about how, especially during that time when we were alone, like we could call on other than humans to support us and to help us. So what led you to initially become so interested in ancestral healing that that is the main focus of one of the main focuses of what you share in the world?
Yeah. I was drawn to ritual and religion and shamanism and things like that when I was even a teenager, and I had the good fortune to connect with some teachers early on. They gave me some basic skills, and those early teachers nudged me to relate directly with my own ancestors. So they planted a seed that was very helpful. And what came from that, that was in the late 90s, is I ended up connecting with much older uh, pre-Christianity, in my case, Germanic, English ancestors, places where my people of blood are from historically. And that was very connective and potent and meaningful. And then engaged in a practice of partnering with them to assist those among the recent dead, like my grandfather who'd taken his own life, or other ones from my recent lineages that still were in need of healing. No one had been tending in spirit to those things. So I did a cycle of that work in my own, and for maybe 6 years of fairly focused way, and also started to train as a therapist during that time. And then from 2004 or 5 until the present, really, so the last, I don't know, just 25 years, something. I don't know if I can do the math. 20 years. And I've started to help others with the process of coming into relationship with their ancestors of blood and others. I've expanded the inquiry of getting to know ancestors of land and lineage and whatnot. It's not the only thing I'm up to, but the things that have contributed to that continuing to be a part of my path, not just like an interest for a little while. One is recognizing how powerful it's been to address the wound or the cultural like hole or lack of culture from the blown out mess of white supremacy, of settler colonialism, of the sort of myth of US exceptionalism, and all the tendency to avoid the difficult history in the United States and the Americas generally. And that I didn't understand what a bad impact that has until I started digging around and realizing that a lot of the pain I was moving with is like ultimately cultural pain. And so I could say a lot, but that's one way in which the reconnection has sustained me personally. What I've seen with others is that it's beneficial for personal and family healing, like deeply beneficial in a way that doesn't exclude, but it expands upon the project of psychotherapy. I'm also a trained psychotherapist, doctor of psychology, and those practices are very valuable. And not always, but often they're fairly they're missing a piece. They're incomplete because they're not tracking the deeper roots of the patterns, and they're often not necessarily putting folks into direct communion with the gifts and blessings and goodness that come from their families, even when their families are harmful in the recent generations. And so just cutting off from family isn't a fix. That creates a different kind of wound. And that leads me to say a thing, I guess, about another sustaining quality of the ancestral focus, which is it's good at uprooting extreme individualism and the illusion that we are separate or separable from the rest of life. And a lot of people, like, if it's a yes no question, are you separate from the rest of life, people are going to be like, no. Let me check no on that. But we tend to get a lot of that conditioning, and it leads to a lot of loneliness and just like suffering that's avoidable. And getting to know and come into conscious communion in relationship with our own ancestors of body, of blood, it encourages a little bit more soft and diffuse sense of separateness or identity. Like, this is also the voice of my ancestors. I'm also the face of my lineages. This is a conversation also between my people and your people, and us and all the listeners and their people, and the earth as it speaks through us. And coming to not just be like, that's a cool idea, but to experience those layers of connectedness in what we are is an antidote to this sense of being cut off, or to being very individual in a separate way. And that matters. That leads to like better political choices, better education systems, better parenting, kinder relationships, more accountability, things like that. So it's good for getting at cultural wounds, I guess, is what I'd say.
Yeah. And that is so true about psychotherapy. Like, as helpful as it can be, it has its limitations, and that, like you said, it doesn't necessarily address the roots of where these things come from in us. And I know that was my experience. It's like there was only a certain level I could go to in my own personal healing, and just tapping into the ancestral level just kind of accelerated things, or opened up so much more for me.
It's good to have a well-adjusted self, but at a certain point, the self is the problem, or it's the obstacle. In therapy, a lot of therapists, unless they've done those layers of cultivation, and some have, of course, but therapy doesn't, on the whole, tend to frame the client's suffering as cultural pain, as soul level pain, as pain that comes from confusion about destiny and purpose, as things like that, which actually matter a great deal. If we're not on an identity level congruent with what our soul came here to do, the soul level of what we are is going to make it difficult for that unhelpful false identity to keep functioning. And so having our life fall apart might be what's needed to come into more congruency. If a therapist has seen that in their own life and done their own inner work, then they can probably hold a good space for it. But it's not typically part of the training. Yeah.
Yeah, and my experience of just learning to connect with my ancestors through your work is that a lot of my relationship with my ancestors is helping to keep me on my path, helping me to show me what my path is. And that's like one of my main compasses now,
Yeah.
that connection.
Congrats. Yeah. They're really excellent guides. It's another benefit of devoting a cycle of care to ancestral healing and reconnection is it almost always leads to a bit more clarity about one's calling, destiny, purpose, work in the world, whatever. That doesn't mean it's how you make money, but there tends to be some perspective on what gifts and challenges we've inherited from our people. That perspective follows from actually coming into conversation with them. They're like, oh yeah, you've been experiencing these things. Let us give you the fuller context. Like, yeah, you have these gifts. Let us give you the instruction manual on them. Like it's easier to actually talk with people who lived them their whole life. Here's some instruction. Well, that's efficient. It's efficient. You don't have to recreate everything. And in that way, it's a chance. We come into relationship with them. We bring the unconscious relationship conscious as a way to also have more freedom from them. There's a certain amount of influence that's unavoidable. And if we bring that conscious, we can actually have some amount of choice and negotiation within it. Or we can do it unconsciously, and it may or may not turn out well, but it'll turn out somehow. It just won't be conscious. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm an internal family systems practitioner, and something that I appreciate about that modality is how it brings in the ancestral piece and the cultural piece, and looking at what we take on from those levels. And a lot of your work is actually, a lot of practitioners are actually integrating some of your work into, including myself now, and it's very complementary. And working with an IFS is called legacy burdens, or
Sure.
ancestral wounds or traumas. So it's, yeah, I appreciate having the experience with your work to be able to bridge it in those areas as well.
On a real practice oriented level, the approaches to psychotherapy that recognize that we're a multiplicity of voices and parts and people and souls or whatever, I find to be the most congruent or compatible with earth honoring animist values, with ritual arts, with all that. Because there's not, I mean, different systems might hold it in different ways, but a good parts model isn't going to pressure the individual human to reconcile all those parts into a singular self in a sort of oppressive way. We're a myriad of like cacophony, lots of different voices, lots of different needs and things, and ancient things and immature things, and all kinds of aspects of what we are. And when we close that down, our humanity is diminished. We're doing the same thing as clear cutting a forest. We're just doing it psychologically. We're saying, no, we're going to remake the world in the image and the voice of these certain aspects of self at the expense of these others. And so part of the ecology sensibility is allowing for a lot of different aspects of what we are. Yeah.
And so, speaking of animism, I know that's another big part of what you teach, and also something that I appreciated during the pandemic and now beyond, but especially during that time when just not being around humans, of just opening up relationship to trees and stones and bodies of water and the land itself. And I'm wondering if you can speak more about that, just because we live in such a generally human centric world. Like, what are some ways to deepen connection with what you call other than humans, and what's the benefit
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah. Let's talk about culture for a moment. Like if I were to say, if we were to say as two European ancestry people, like, what's the benefit of being in relationship with brown people or black people? What's the benefit of being in relationship with, trans or gender non-binary people or people who don't speak English? Why is that valuable or whatever? That would be like, whoa, that's an edgy question. Why do you even need to ask that, right? And one would hope that it's obvious to affirm the humanity of all different kinds of people. And the other than humans, by whatever name, are just people. And so we're talking about cultural dynamics when we talk about our dynamics with the local rivers or the grasses near our home, or the food that we're eating, or the electrical fire used to have this conversation, or the fibers in the clothes we're wearing. These plants and animals and elemental beings and spirits and deities, and by whatever name, they also have culture. They also are culture, encultured beings. So humans are not the only source of culture. and or the only source of personhood, if we want to be a little philosophical about it. So if we say, we could say, what's the benefit of relating with rock people, like of communing with the stones? We could talk about the wisdom that the stones often carry and can activate within us, and that's a fine conversation, sort of like a what's good for me about it, like what do I get out of it? Okay, so that's one conversation. Another layer of it is what we get out of it is our sense of self is not diminished in the same way. Like as a white person, if I'm racist, of course that's harmful to the other than white people. I'm being a racist loser too, but it also hurts me. It hurts me in like a soul, like it diminishes my being. I'm directly harmed by it also. And if we don't honor the relatedness with the rest of life, of course the others are harmed by it, and we get things like a global extinction crisis and rapid human-driven climate change and other kinds of catastrophe that we're living in. But we also are less well ourselves. It hurts us on some level, like we're diminished. And so in that way, it's good for our soul to come back into relationship and to bring the existing relationships conscious again. It's not like we're not in relationship. And yeah, so it's good for those reasons. And it allows us from that place to start to tell a different story about what culture is. Because the story we tell ourselves now, if I say to you or listeners, oh, I'm involved in cultural healing work, most people are going to assume that I'm engaging with other humans about human created troubles and all that. That's not false. But if I said I'm engaged in cultural healing work and I mostly am hanging out with insects, people would be like, well, where's the cultural healing work? Like, do you know these people over here? They're small and they have more legs than you, but let me tell you. So that's the I know I'm answering a kind of a less pragmatic layer, but that's the layer that has the most excitement for me these days, is the way that we approach and conceptualize of these other kinds of people, these differently bodied people who are our kin on this planet and beyond, if you want to focus there. How we approach them makes a tremendous difference in how we're going to navigate through the mess we're in, and also in how whole we're going to be as people. So the case is like, yeah, you should come back into connection because it's good and you'll get things from it, and you can enjoy more relational intimacy and expand your emotional psychological range by connecting with cedar trees and volcanoes and deities. But also you'll sleep better at night because the part of you that knows it's a relational universe will feel like a little safer existing as part of you. When we don't relate well with the rest of life, we create, I think you might call them like exiles, like cultural exiles, and maybe in IFS terms, I don't know the system that well, but we reject the parts of us that that already know those things.
Yeah. And so, like, for instance, with you moving to new country, new land, like, what are some ways that you are engaging with the land there to build those new relationships in a new place?
Yeah, I'm very early in that. I mean, I've done basic things like make offerings at the river and cemetery, and I try to be like honest and generous with the people here, like giving a little extra change today. Somebody was, had their bowl out or their hat out. That's an offering to the earth also. The humans here are the earth also. But I'm not there yet, but my Spanish is good, but it's not excellent. And I look forward to a time when I'm able, hopefully next year, to anchor in-person teachings that make space for, with humility, some of the cultural pain that's present here to surface. Even the not very well metabolized 40 years of brutal dictatorship that ended in the 70s is still really raw and really present in a lot of people's hearts, and to come in as someone who hasn't lived that story requires a great deal of humility and listening. And I do have some skills and ritual tech that can be useful for the people motivated to address the cultural wounds that are present here or in other places. I mean, that's my work. So I say that because I think belonging is earned. And so I'm looking for ways to earn my belonging here. And that's just going to take time. Like for now, it's just like being humble, following the rules, showing up for every little bureaucratic appointment, and like not cutting corners, and, being respectful. Yeah.
Mhm. And you having lived in places for longer periods of time where you did have a deep connection with place and did have that deeper feeling of belonging, um, what what was the felt sense of that? Like, how did you know when you got to a place of like, yes, I'm deeply connected here?
Hard to put that in words. The place I have cultivated that most intentionally over a number of years was in the San Francisco Bay Area, through hundreds really of days of in person, like on the ground outside ritual, on, sometimes, well, a lot of group ritual on the land and the mountains around the bay and with the waters, and really coming to know the land as body, coming to relate with the mountain spirits directly, with the um, I would feel when I left the circle of mountains around the bay. I like feel it. Oh, I'm out of my terrain now. But when there was a sense of being able to be in a position to welcome others. And like, I'm not alone. I know we make a lot of gestures of respect in different tangible, relational, and ritual ways to the indigenous peoples and ancestors and difficult history there. So a lot of that ritual work was a form of earning belonging by tending to those layers of things. But like, how does that feel? Well, that feels very intimate and very
Mhm.
supportive, and like when you're in relationship with the land enough that you've earned some degree of belonging. And when I say earn, I don't mean like you have to earn your love, or it's not like you have to be good enough. I don't mean it in that way, but I mean uh, participation in the story, and saying, well, your pain is my pain, it's shared because we're family. That's more how I mean it. And so moving like that, there's a sense, for example, that the land confers a kind of protection or a blessing, because it's in their best interest, the elders whose bodies are the place, that you not die. And so there's a sense that you'll be looked out for because you're being sponsored by those spirits, because you're actually doing something that they wish for you to do. And it was also very important as a sustained working for me to break down some of the conditioning being separate from the rest of life, and this whole like human nature binary or fiction. So coming to know my body as an extension of the land and the waters and all that it's good. There's a lot of sorrow in it as well, because there's a lot of pain right now in the earth.
Yeah.
Not only, but there's also a lot of that. So you got to be willing to feel deeply if you want deeper layers of intimacy. That, I mean, that's true with anything, but it's also true with the land, I think. Yeah.
So talking about feeling more deeply, I want to talk about grief a little bit. And I don't know if this is still on your website, but I know some years ago there was a talk on your website about grief as a sacred practice that was really supportive for me. And I just recommended it to a lot of people. And this is another thing that is not included in our culture, these rituals around grief and seeing grief as sacred. Um, can you speak more about this?
Yeah, it's a topic I actually I love, and I'm teaching a course next month or in late 2022, and practices for grieving and heartache, and so, but it's woven into a lot of other things. I teach the animism work because how can you not uh, notice the catastrophe if you're connecting with the earth or with the ancestral healing work, whatever? There's a component of sorrow and reconnection, but oh, what to say about grief? Psychology is generally better than the way the dominant culture tends to be, at least in the US, because psychology will at least affirm the importance of grieving rather than being blocked and repressive about it. However, the blind spot often of psychology of being too individualistic can lead us to have the confusion that it's my grief or it's my sorrow, it's mine, it's personal, it's like interior, private. And it might feel that way. I'm not saying it can't be like that, but I I don't even know what's mine and not mine in terms of emotions and all that anymore. Like, sure, I get it in a practical way, but I'm not always clear what I'm sad about or what I'm blissed out about or whatever, because it is so inherent that we're participating in the bigger pain, the bigger story. And there are moments where I'll just almost collapse for a minute or two of just like sobbing, or just be hit by something. There's the news. I've been following the war in Ukraine, for example, and war is such a disaster, and for so many beings, human and other. And I think that we hold the world together through being willing to feel. It can be an act of like stitching reality together, or keeping things held in the greater story, or like there needs to be how to say it. The world's made more of story than anything, and grieving when things are fragmented or painful or just changing is a way of feeling the truth of the story and holding the world together through authentically expressing that. That might involve tears, it might involve vocalizing or movement, or wearing all black or wearing all white, or eating or not eating, or 10,000 forms it can take. But the bearing witness to what's happening internally, externally, and not turning away from it requires some courage. And it is in that way of an indispensable aspect of the overall path of being an adult, like of being an emotional, spiritual, if you will, grown up, being willing to feel and turn toward like just how much pain there is, and how much pain, like in regular, quiet, domestic ways, where we have sad, lonely childhoods, and then we take it out on one another, and how frequently that's happening, or the ways like kids get bullied at school, and it's not that we need to hang out in only that frequency, because there's like 24/7 programming on the grief channel. It's not something you like drain the well of, but it's important to know that the ways that we hurt or feel sorrow are not only personal, that the personal is a gateway to collective pain. And part of being checked in to the world is having some door in your heart open to that, at least occasionally. So it tempers you and helps you to be more kind and humble and compassionate, because there's a lot of suffering. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, I know that just behind the scenes, I imagine that you're doing a lot. You're raising a family, just moved, you are teaching a lot, you are also running a business. How is it for you to um, be with all these things simultaneously?
It's hard. Sometimes it's lonely and a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
Um, but I choose it also, like an international move with two young kids. It's not like a relaxing thing, really. And yet I'm really like I said, I feel at the front end of a big detox. I'm like still, we haven't picked up our final like residency card. And even then we're not residents yet, but um it's not all the way real yet. So I haven't totally like relaxed into it, but there's a detox that I feel on the front end of. And yeah, what to say? One thing I've been learning to let go of in recent years, really since becoming a father, is perfectionism. Because my father and brother are both engineers in their own way, vocationally, and I feel very in touch with my Germanic ancestry and very like we started the interview at 9 here. I'm like, okay, it's exactly 9. Where are you at? And so that's not very Spanish, but
Mm.
that that perfectionism is uh, I feel like I'm getting like a B at all the different domains of my life, which is like an A for humanity, and still a B in the sense that I got books I want to write. I'd like to do even more with my kids. I'd like to be even more leaned in with my marriage, my self-care, with my spiritual practice, with my friendships, with my Spanish studies, with my sleep, and all of it. But I'm kind with myself most of the time. And so that makes it workable. And I am allowing within the one of the traps of becoming a brand, if you will, like ancestral medicine, like the ancestor guy, which is fine. But it's imperative for me to be authentic and honest about where I'm at with that, and to allow myself to change and grow. If I don't, I'm not doing anybody else any favors. But it's like any to artists be like, oh, your second album wasn't like your first album. Like, yeah, no doubt. I didn't promise it would be. So there's a weird way in which becoming even a medium well-known person is a funny feedback loop that it's hard to not notice a little bit how you're perceived by the world. And then I'm like, oh, should I keep doing that? Should I do a different thing? Well, I need to fall back into even more clarity about what I'm doing here. Make sure I'm true to that. Fortunately, I happen to still be into the ancestor tending, not because I need to, but because I actually am learning new things about it as I go. But I like being alive, and there's always more learning and growth and things to do and everything. But especially marriage and parenting requires flexibility and heart openness and the ability to yield. So I've continued to learn all those things.
And as you've grown and just out of necessity needed to hire more support and scale more and just offer bigger programs, like what have been some of your biggest learnings around expanding in that way?
You're not going to make everybody happy. And some people will have strong projections onto you and hate you even and feel like real, like hatred for you. So that is complicated for someone who likes to be liked and is very Libra, true to the sign in that way of caring what people think on some level. And so, like, I wouldn't wish leadership or, fame is really describes my condition, but like being a public figure, I wouldn't wish that on my enemies. Really, it's not. I don't mean it in a whiny way, but it's a weird condition a little, because you have to wonder, like, at times at least, are people relating with me because of that? Do they want something from me? Here in Spain, it's lovely because nobody asks you what you do really so much. ¿A qué te dedicas? Like, what do you dedicate yourself to? It's like a soft way of asking it. But oh yeah, what to say? I forgot the original question.
Just like what are the biggest learnings from growing
Well, yeah, I've had to learn
your
to
business?
like dig into the finances and the hiring and the how to be a business person. And I just didn't have those skills. I'm not sure that I have them in abundance now, but I really, meet regularly with our excellent director of operations and have weekly staff meetings. And we have a team of around 8 people right now, which requires some income to employ 8 people and to partially employ for side work a good number of other ritualists through the Ancestral Medicine Network as supervisors and event leaders. And so I enjoy bringing meaningful work into the world. And so that's a point of satisfaction. I enjoy being able to meet the basic needs of my family doing work that I love. So I'm grateful in that way. But it's not easy. And people sometimes think it's like, oh, you got this rock star ideal life, or like that's great, but it's easy in the weird distortion bubble of social media to form a picture of someone in their life, or to be like, oh, I'm jealous of their success, or I have that feeling about someone. And it's like, oh, Daniel, like, jealousy is a real corrosive kind of thing. It's important to me not push it away, but it's good to notice that. And it comes out of this place of scarcity and competition, which is really it's a rough energy to sit with. But I try not to focus on it too much. There's a need to responsibly inhabit the roles, and it means I can't be friends with a lot of people who would be, awesome people to hang out with more, because they've studied with me, and then that's complicated. And so there's a need to be attentive to power dynamics and all kinds of things, and to, be mindful of impact. That's just leadership in general. Yeah.
And for anyone who's interested, and we're going to talk about how people can learn more from you or study more from you, but if someone's wanting to who hasn't done work with their ancestors before and is wanting just to take a next step towards that, is there any simple practice or something that you could offer them?
Yeah. The first layer of thing is, whatever you'll do that. Because you need to just find a way in. So if it's like intellectual is the safety setting I will tolerate, then read the book. or read a book, any book on your people. If you are open to doing direct one-on-one work, there's a directory of, I think, 90-ish practitioners now. Some still in training, but most certified of those ones. And the work's available in a dozen or more languages. And so do a session with somebody if you want. They're trained to guide clients in the client reconnecting directly with their own ancestors. The practitioners are not being like all psychic. They're just helping you to connect with your people in a safe way. So you can do that. We offer an online course, as you spoke to, which is a structured, perhaps less threatening or more connective way, perhaps, of moving through the steps of safe ancestral lineage reconnection and healing work. And there are other courses that we offer through Ancestral Medicine that also touch on the subject of ancestral reconnection. So those are options. And yeah, whatever, like sessions and the course and the book are the three that come to mind. But whatever way people can find in, that's the way to go. It's not, I guess one thing I would add there is there's nothing spiritual about it. You don't need to believe in anything. It's not like, I'm involved with religious traditions because there's a lot of interesting people and practices and teachings within them, but that's not everybody's deal. That's not like, I don't know, I feel like I'm mining them respectfully for juicy bits that the rest of the world doesn't want to have to do all that digging for. And but you don't need a different identity or a whole belief system or whatever to relate with your ancestors. Like if someone's going to eat better or like start a physical exercise practice, it's not like, well, I don't know if I believe in exercise and food. There isn't that extra layer. It's just like, well, that's probably good for me. Let me try it. And so ancestor reconnection or ancestral healing work is just relational work. It requires culturally noticing messages you may have internalized that invalidate the reality of the ancestors. So in that way, it's cultural repair work, but it still doesn't mean it's religious. It's not about belief or spirituality per se. It's just relationship tending.
Yeah. And what is your current growing edge?
Well, I've been rediscovering a bit discipline, spiritual discipline with practice, which is great. Our younger one is in school in her cole, her Montessori daycare, and she likes it. And it means we have some hours out of the day where there are no little nervous systems co-regulating with your body. And it's kind of glorious. And so I've been remembering what I like and need about spiritual practice. And like I said earlier, the edge around not being perfectionistic is an ongoing edge. And then I want to write the second book finally. So making space, like being organized to make space for my creative process and value it. That's important. And it's always being open-hearted for me is an important edge, because I'm a little headstrong and I like that world of ideas and speech and teaching and all that. And it's fun, which is fine. It just needs balance with the life of the heart and body wellness. So those are always good balancing factors for me. If I'm taking good care of my body and resting enough, keeping my heart open, all the spiritual teachings and words and all that tend to be fine. Like they're in alignment and good for me. Otherwise, they become a way of avoidance of the more balanced approach.
Do you have a sense of what your second book will be about?
Yeah. Cultural healing work
Mhm.
earth reconnection to some degree, but also how to get at cultural pain and ancestral intergenerational pain through ritual work, and how to transform that, because that happens in the practitioner training that I guide. We're in the 6th cohort or group of that, and there are moments often toward the end of the training where this potential starts to become clear, when people have both done a lot of deep work with their own ancestors and they have a bit of a shared language for how to navigate in ritual space. They're like, oh, great, now we got this. And now here's this whole other layer of it. That whole other layer is like, well, my people as a collective actually have things to say to your people as a collective. We have history. We have some, like, they have some things they need to talk about through us. How are we going to show up for that cultural decompression in this moment and the cultural exchange? We do that unconsciously anyways. We read people as the face of their people, for better or for worse. But it's a little messy when it's not conscious, and when there hasn't been ancestral healing work preceding it, and there's no shared agreements. But when those things are in place, there's a lot of practices and possibilities that open up. So I am motivated to give some clarity and structure to that.
And where can listeners learn more about you? I will have your links in the show notes, and also, is there anything coming up that you want to share with us? This will be coming out in November.
Yeah, the grief course in December is that, and then the next ancestral healing, lineage healing course will start in early next year. But there's a lot of different offerings at this point. We have a whole library now of self-paced courses that people can engage with and find where they're drawn. Like some people, like if you have listeners that are therapists, a book that I don't have time to write is how, in this moment, is how to bring an earth honoring animist, ancestor honoring perspective into the realm of psychotherapy and psychology in a way that is unapologetically decolonizing oriented, and like these are legitimate relationships. To suggest otherwise is a problematic, racist, reductionist imposition of materialist epistemologies, and all the academics can just sit the fuck down for a minute and listen to some more like ritually grounded, earthy people that have been navigating the human psyche for some thousands of years before the creation of the field of psychology, so that an actual dialogue can unfold. And so that, I know I'm having an intense edge about it, but it's how I feel toward the field. This is like the arrogance within the field when it's present. It's not always present, but it's often present. Causes me to just like sit down, stop talking like white European thing for a minute, and from that moment of pause, there's actually a lot of rich exchange that can unfold, and it's happening some, but it could be happening more. So there's a whole like side passion I have about the intersection of psychology with ritual arts and cultural healing. And there's an online course on that, on animist psychology, but I'm not foregrounding it right now. I just think of that as an example of it's not only ancestors all the time. Yeah. And so people, what I'd recommend is, like I said earlier about ancestral reconnection, is find your way in. If you find resonance with whatever I'm sharing, maybe it's the earth reconnection work or session work with somebody or psychology, whatever it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the courses are great because they just give you that community and the container and the teachings just to go through the steps, do the practices. It's more accountability.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking with someone. I know we will finish soon, but I was talking with someone who's trying to help me with writing a second book, and just saying like, some part of me wants to write like the popular, reflective, sort of poetic storytelling book, Like I have that in me. But at the end of the day, like I'm a pragmatic teacher. And the way I wrote the Ancestral Healing book is like, here's the principle. Here's an example of it. Here's a poetic reflection on it. Here's a practice for how you do it. It's a how-to book. And that feels important to me, to equip people with practices rather than just like, you should kind of be like this.
Yeah. To
Okay,
give
well,
people like the path.
yeah, like the tools to actually be like, I'm just saying there's a mountain over there. Here's like a pickaxe and a rope and, you know, some furry gloves. And this is how it worked for me, but, you know, give it a try. That's different than being like, mountains are so beautiful. And like, look at that mountain over there. And people are like, oh yeah, this person climbed that mountain. But people need, it's important that we each find our own direct experience of the sacred. And that we allow that to reorganize our life from the inside out. Doesn't matter how it comes, but it matters that it happened. Yeah.
That feels like just the perfect thing to end with. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for, I don't know if you're usually a night owl. I'm impressed that you're doing this at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at
I
night.
have another teaching in a half an hour. That's how it has to
Okay.
go here.
I'm
Yeah.
usually asleep by 9, but
Yeah. The
thanks for
consequence
being
of,
with us.
yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks to everybody for listening. Yeah. Good.